Thank you. Thank you for having me along at your lunch today. It's a privilege to be here. I'm going to talk to you about something that I am very passionate about, and that is, in my own humble way, changing the face of business in the economy in New Zealand, if I can do that. So I'm going to start by telling you my story and then tell you my plan for how I hope to change the face of business in New Zealand. So this is me leaving the University of Warwick in England with a degree in comparative American studies. Yes. And not surprisingly, I left the University of Warwick in England and I couldn't get a job. And so I did something that was actually the most useful thing I've ever done in my life. I did a 6-month diploma in secretarial studies, and I learnt the single most useful skill I've ever learnt, which is to touch type. And I can tell you, having written 2 books now, that being able to touch type really has been the most useful thing I've ever learned. So armed with my secretarial diploma, I was able to get a job. And I got a job as a secretary in an advertising agency. Now, it was a long time ago. It wasn't quite that long ago. That's a scene from the TV series Mad Men, which is set in New York, I believe, in the 1950s. But it was so long ago that we didn't have computers. Now, looking around this room, I suspect there may be a few other people that remember a time before computers. Sometimes, a few of you. Sometimes I give this talk to a room full of young entrepreneurs and I look around and they have no idea what I'm talking about. They cannot comprehend a time before technology. And so as a secretary, I had to type letters for my boss, and I had a typewriter. And I'd get my paper and I'd squeak it into the typewriter and I'd type away. And if I made a mistake, I had to squeak it back out and pour over it with a twink. Then squeak it back in, type over the top, and carry on. And I kid you not, some days my letters were so heavy with twink I could barely carry them down the corridor to my boss. And I was also extremely disorganised, and so within 6 months they had decided to move me to the creative department as a trainee copywriter. Now, I don't think they had a job for a trainee copywriter. They were just pretty desperate to get me out of that secretarial pool. So I became a fully fledged copywriter eventually. I worked in London and in Singapore, and for Ogilvy and Mather in Singapore, and then they transferred me to Wellington as their senior writer. And I was 26 years old, and on the outside, everything looked amazing. I was earning far more money than a 26-year-old probably should be earning. They gave me a beautiful brand new car. I had a fabulous apartment. But on the inside, I was actually quite miserable. And looking back over my life, and I sort of realise, and perhaps many of you here too have thought about this, that we go through stages in life. And in our mid-20s and our sort of mid to late 20s, it was a phase for me of wondering what it was all about, really. I was working, I wasn't really enjoying my work that much, and I wasn't feeling that fulfilled. And I guess I was just sort of looking for something, but I didn't really know what it was. So at that time, my flatmate suggested that I do a program, a seminar, course workshop called Money and You. Has anyone heard of Money and You? Anyone at all? Oh, a few people. Back then, everybody had heard of Money and You. It almost had sort of like a cult following. And so it was personal development, creating wealth, and business concepts all rolled into a 2.5-day, quite intensive program. So I went along, and the course was taken by this guy. So, this is Robert Kiyosaki. For those of you who don't recognise him or do recognise him, he's the author of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. And this was long before he wrote those books and became a household name and the multi-millionaire investor and businessman that he is now. He was travelling the world with his wife and his other business partner at the time, and they were running workshops and seminars. And I have to say, it sounds extremely corny, but my life was changed by attending this workshop. And I went from being someone who didn't have a clear sense of where I was going or what my purpose was, to coming out and feeling like I really did know where I wanted to go and having a plan to get there. And in Money and You, they said you mustn't make a life-changing decision for 7 days after the course. So on the 7th day after the course, I resigned my job. Doesn't say anything about my personality type whatsoever. And I set myself up as a freelance copywriter, ostensibly so I could follow Robert Kiyosaki around the world and study with him. And so that's what I did. I studied with him in the States. He was running 5-day residential leadership courses, and where he would bring together sort of thought leaders of the time into one area. We all studied together. And I studied with him. He did a 16-day residential business course for entrepreneurs in Hawaii. And it cost me an absolute fortune, but I went and studied it in Hawaii. And it was while I was in Hawaii that I learned two things about myself. One is that I wanted to create financial independence for myself at some stage in my life. I wanted to get to a point where I could choose whether I worked for money or I could choose whether I worked, but not necessarily for money. So I wasn't forced to work for money, but I could choose to do what I wanted with my time. And the other thing I realised was that I was never going to get there by being an advertising copywriter and exchanging time for money, by being a freelancer. The only way I could ever earn more money being a freelancer was to work more hours. And there simply were not enough hours in the year for me to earn the kind of money that I wanted to create the wealth that I wanted. So it became very apparent to me very quickly that I was going to have to start a business. And seeing as advertising was the only thing that I knew at that time, it made sense that I would start an advertising agency. So while I was in Hawaii, I put a plan together to build and sell an advertising agency within 10 years. That was the goal, and I did a plan over that course, over those 16 days to do that. When I returned from Hawaii to Wellington, I started an advertising agency called Red Rocks, named scientifically by mountain biking through the very beautiful Red Rocks on the south coast. And when I started Red Rocks, we had absolutely nothing. I had absolutely nothing. No clients, no staff, just a windowless back office in the old World Trade Center. I know some of you may remember what that was like back in the 80s. It was a concrete monstrosity. It's much better now, I think. And so I had nothing. When I sold Red Rocks to the Ogilvy Group 9 years later, we were billing in excess of 25 million. We had a number of blue chip clients on our portfolio. We launched Kiwibank to market. We had the Inland Revenue, the Air Force. We won Agency of the Year, and NBR had called us New Zealand's premier boutique agency. So it was a real success story for me, and when I sold, if I was wise and invested wisely, I was well on my way to achieving my goal towards financial freedom, and I wouldn't have to work again. So I didn't work for a couple of years, and then I started another business, completely random move away from advertising. I started a pet care company called Pet Angels. I started it with a business partner. Again, we started with nothing, and really what we were doing was cat feeding, dog walking, house sitting, that sort of service. But we created what was quite revolutionary at the time. This was 7 years ago. It was a very sophisticated online matching system between people who wanted to be pet carers and pet owners who wanted a premium service for their pets. And it was all managed online and booked online, so that all we had to do was recruit the pet angels and train them and do the marketing. So we got it to a point where we had 150 employees across the country, and then we sold it to a competitor. So once again, I'd sort of followed the same formula, and once again, I was at a point where I was looking for what was next. And at this point, it occurred to me that I had reached a point once again where I was wondering what the meaning of it all was. And I'd had some successes, and I'd been, as you can imagine, over that period of time, I'd been fully engrossed in those businesses. And I had achieved some success, but I was still finding myself asking myself, what's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? And feeling that I really needed to be doing something that was more about giving back or making a difference, and wondering what that was. And so I was thinking about what my purpose was, and I remembered when I was sitting next to Robert Kiyosaki in Hawaii one day, we were having lunch, and he'd been talking that morning in the morning session about finding your life purpose and having a life purpose. And so at lunch I said to him, well, how do you find your life purpose? How do you know where to look? And he said this to me. He said, Laura, you'll find what you love by looking at what you hate. And it stuck with me as something that I've thought about often. And here I was at this point in time going, I knew what it was that I hated now. Once I'd sold my second business, I found myself doing a number of talks and talking to small business networks and to women's business groups, and people were coming up to me afterwards saying, could I do some mentoring? Could I help them with their businesses? And I started to do this, and what I was discovering is that the businesses coming to me, the small businesses, often they were in quite a lot of pain. They were working far too hard, they were working really long hours, they weren't paying themselves enough, they weren't taking enough holidays. They were putting themselves under immense pressure, And I would look at them and sometimes I'd say, if you went and worked for someone else and they treated you the way you treat yourself, you'd take a personal grievance out against them. And it's not meant to be like this. This is not what business is meant to be like. And it occurred to me that I had learned something with the formulas that I'd learned and applied, that I could really start making a difference and help businesses actually move through this kind of hamster wheel running endlessly and help them find a way through that. And at that time, I saw these statistics. That I was a very reputed research company about 3 years ago put these statistics out, and I was actually quite saddened when I saw them. So out of nearly 500,000 businesses in New Zealand, 94% of them have less than 10 employees. So that's probably no surprise to us. We know we are a nation of small businesses that make up our economy. 74% of them were deemed unwilling or unsuitable for expansion. That really saddened me. I mean, what is that about? What is it? I know that means that 26% are suitable, and those are the group that the government wants to work with, and groups like the Ice House want to work with, and that's fantastic. They should. Of course, it makes sense to work with those that are suitable for expansion. But it made me think, what about the rest of them? That's an awful lot of people's dreams and people who've started businesses. And what's going on? And then I looked at the next stat, which was that 55% of self-employed people are aged 40 to 59, which means in the next 10 to 15 years, there's a whole bunch of people that are going to be hitting retirement who haven't actually worked out how to grow a business that's going to be worth anything by the time they get there. And that to me was really sad as well. And I thought there's 10 to 15 years of I could do to help those people actually get themselves ready to have something valuable when it comes to that time to retire. And then the final stat that I read was that the average small business owner pays themselves on average $40,000 a year. And my experience is often less than that. I get people coming to work with me, they don't pay themselves at all and haven't done for years. And so this is actually the undercurrent of small business in our country. And I'm happy that there are groups out there helping those that are ready for expansion. But I feel like there's some work to be done. If we can actually even shift some of these over into the next group to get them ready for expansion, then we're going to be in better shape even more. So why are 74% of our small businesses in this country unsuitable or unwilling to grow? You've probably got your own thoughts about that. I thought about it quite long and hard, and the two reasons I've come up with are these. One is they don't know how to, and that's probably the most, well actually no, that's not the most common. These two reasons are equally common. But they don't know how to because a lot of small business owners, and I talk to an awful lot so I do know this, they start a business because they've got an idea, a product or a service or something they're good at, and they put their focus and their energy on the product and the service. They don't put their focus and energy on the model that's actually going to take that product and service and scale it and help it grow. So they often end up creating a business that's heavily dependent on the owner and isn't set up to grow. And there isn't really any education, or hasn't been any education, that's focused on actually helping them look for scalability rather than just product development. So that was one area I felt I could really do some good work with. The other one, which is even more troubling to some degree, is, and certainly I find when I'm working with people, if I hit this issue, then there's not much I can do. I can pretty much help people grow, look at their model, but if they don't have a mindset for growth, if they're not willing to grow, then there's not much I can do to help them. And this is prevalent in the New Zealand sort of undercurrent that I'm discovering. That is one of the reasons why we have this unwillingness to grow, is that they really just don't want to. It's kind of okay to stay small, and it's okay to just, I think it used to be called the BMW and the batch. That was the dream. But to be honest, the businesses I'm coming across, they're not going to be a BMW or a batch, not if they're paying themselves $40,000 a year. So it's this unwillingness that I really wanted to take a look at. So when I'm working with small businesses, this is the question that I ask. How is your money mindset and your business mindset hindering you from having an extraordinary business? And I do believe that everyone's capable, everyone that wants to have a business is capable of having an extraordinary one if they get the mindset and the model bit right. So I looked at myself and I go, I was a secretary and a copywriter. I wasn't a business person. I didn't go to business school. I didn't study any of that stuff. I did 16 days in Hawaii. That's my full business education. So it is possible. If I can do it, anyone can do it. And that's what gave me thinking. I started, as you know, I've said I was working with business owners, but it's one-on-one, and it was slow. So I thought, how can I actually get my ideas and what I've done and take it to as many people as possible? So I took another year out, and I wrote a book. A book's called Liberate Your Business, and it's 8 stages of how you work through the mindset and the model and actually get the tools in place to create a business that ultimately will be valuable, scalable and saleable by the time you're ready to retire, or earlier if you want to move faster. So it's really about helping business owners set themselves free and create financial independence. Financial freedom is the ability to choose how you spend your time without having to earn a living. And there's another sort of undercurrent that I've sort of feel like I've come across, is that there is sort of almost a negativity around wealth sometimes in New Zealand. It's a bad thing, and the reality is it's not a bad thing. It's about financial freedom, because we're caught up in a society that dictates that we go to work to earn money to pay bills, and we all scurry around doing that. But to get to a point where you don't have to do that and you can actually use your time doing more valuable, making a difference, helping people, is actually an honourable pursuit. It's not a bad thing. So firstly, getting over that sort of any negative associations with wealth was one of the things that I felt I needed to look at. And then really getting business owners to think, are you an owner-operator or are you a wealthy entrepreneur? So what does an owner-operator do? Pushes the cart. They operate. They create a job. And I've said this quite brutally to business owners, that you don't have a business, you have a job. If your business is completely dependent on you and you have no intention or plan for changing that over time, then you've created a job for yourself. And as I've already talked about, for many, this is a job that's paying you a lot less than someone else would pay you if you went and did the same job for them. So that's okay, but just be aware that at some point you may not want to do that job anymore. And so you haven't created a business that's actually going to set you up for freedom. So the difference between an owner-operator and a wealthy entrepreneur is that a wealthy entrepreneur builds an asset. And a business, in my view, should be an asset. It should be something that you actually, at some point in time, are able to either sell it or certainly step back from it, so that other people, your family members or whatever, can actually run the business without you needing to be there. Those are the only 2 exits there really are for business. And so helping New Zealand business owners start to think in this way is my way of trying to shift that percentage across. So here's my call out to all New Zealand business owners, in fact to all New Zealanders really, because it is a message that's not necessarily related just to business. Let's step outside the comfort zone, because I think it's a comfort zone that is what's keeping this kind of mindset through the undercurrent of small business. So I found this article online a couple of months ago. This is a company called lynda.com, who sold their business to LinkedIn for $1.3 billion a couple of months ago. Now, for most New Zealanders, that's just ridiculously silly amounts of money that we can't even begin to think. And in fact, it would be bad of us to even think that we should get that kind of money for anything. This is just a husband and wife team that started this business. I think they're German. And they started a business. And lynda.com is, in effect, it's a video library online. And they make really high production videos, short videos on business courses and career courses. They've got about 3,000 courses online. And you subscribe. So it's $30 US, I think, a month. And you can have access to all of these videos. And they've got, I think, about 3 million subscribers paying $30 US a month. So that gives you some idea of the scale. But it's just a husband and wife team. Just nobody special. Just that's what's possible in the world. And that's possible from anywhere. They're in Germany. They sold to LinkedIn. So ordinary people can build extraordinary businesses and lives. So I thought I'd just bring it a bit closer to home, just because that 1.3 billion does tend to sort of send people into a kind of bit of a daze. So here's a more local story that you'll all know. You'll know who these ladies are. The Trilogy sisters. Here was their headline. Sisters sell the Trilogy baby for 20 million. And so they're organic skincare. And so that was the headline a few years ago. I went into the fine print of the article, And it just tells the story, you know, that their father had a chainsaw and helped them sort of create their first office, and that they had this incredible belief in the future of organic products. And so they were just everyday ladies, you know, just like any other business owner. And so it's totally possible. And here's another local story. Does anyone know who this is? This is Jeff Ross of 42 Below Vodka. And here's his exit. 42 Below founder to be multimillionaire and sold to Bacardi for 136 million. And again, it's not about the money. That isn't the point I'm making. I hope that's come across clearly to you. This is about ordinary people creating extraordinary businesses. And I picked this out of the small print in that same article, where it talks about how things were so tight they had to move back into his father's farm, and he was so worried about money that he was frightened to tell his partner, you know, how the latest update. And the point I'm making is just that these are ordinary people. Jeff Ross started making his vodka in his garage in Oriental Parade. These are our local people, and anyone can do it. It all comes down to a mindset, a willingness. And if we can give people, we can inspire them and give them the motivation to think bigger, then we can actually then give them the tools and help them do that. So really, this is a wealthy entrepreneur tip, but it's also a life tip, and I'm sure many of you here are very successful people and you already know this. But what you say to yourself and believe is the single most powerful force in business and indeed in life. And this is really the message that I want to be taking out there to small business owners who really could get into that category, that they're ready for growth and that they can get the funding and the help they need to do that. And it's really about saying, let's get out of the comfort zone. You know, it's very easy to be comfortable, but the real magic happens out there, and you do have to put yourself under a bit of pressure and take a few chances, but the payoff is enormous. So that's really my mission. I would love anyone's help, and if anyone is interested in helping me with this, I'm looking at ways I can take my message and my teaching. Me mentoring one-on-one is pretty slow, so the book's a start. I'm looking at other methodologies for taking my message out there and bringing on other mentors and people who want to help me do that. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, I am aware of that, and that is actually one of the other. There another way to build financial freedom, and financial freedom is something that I believe is important, because I really believe that if individuals can get to a point where you can actually, you know, be making choices about what you do with your time that isn't determined on paying bills, then you're a more useful human being. But there are other ways to get there. Of course there are, and one very valid way is to take the money that you earn in a salaried job or in take the money from your business and invest that elsewhere as you go. You know, that business is only one form of investment, and so, you know, it's all about financial freedom for me. And I don't, you know, however you get there is great. No, I would say do whatever. If that's what they're doing to get themselves started, then good on them. If they're willing to spend their time in the evenings working on a business, and you know, that to me says that they're people that are willing to put it out there. You know, wouldn't criticise that at all. Well, I think the current position is very clearly focusing on growth sectors and, you know, technology businesses and exporting businesses. And I think in terms of New Zealand's economy, it makes sense that if the government's going to put its funding into businesses, it should put its funding into businesses that look like they've got a hope of actually getting there. So I wouldn't necessarily be saying the government should necessarily be putting all of its funding into businesses that don't want to grow. I guess so I'm on a bit of a different mission. My mission is more about changing the mindset of a whole lot of other businesses so they can actually get into that category. You know, with a different way of looking at the world and a different way of looking at their business, they could be eligible for that funding, but you know, they have to get that mindset right first.